Okay, so just again want to reiterate that this is being recorded. It is going to be shared across our social media network afterwards. So I think you've all done it anyway, but if you can change your name just to your first name and make sure your video's off, just for your privacy, that'd be great. Okay, so some of you know who I am. I can see some familiar names up here, and some of you don't, but I'm Sarah Sharp. I am a tick management consultant for TikTok therapy, and we have Gemma with us, who will be introducing herself in a moment. Just before I pass over to Gemma, I just want to let you know that Gemma's actually going to be working with me, well, from immediate effect really, where she offers challenging behaviour and other services as well, but we're going to focus on challenging behaviour today. Programs, so you can speak to her directly. She can share her email with you all at the end, and you can liaise with her. She has a full program set up. I've seen some of them and they look awesome. Okay, Gemma, over to you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Sarah, and hi to everybody. Thank you for attending today. So my name's Gemma. I am based in Edinburgh, hence the accent. I'm a board certified assistant behaviour analyst, and I run a small organisation up here called Keys for Learning. So the bulk of my work experience has primarily been with younger children with an autism diagnosis. But I've been in the field of sort of working with kids with challenging behaviour, communication difficulties, since about 2007, and we cover the central belt of Scotland and overseas as well online. So working online, I know everybody's sort of delving into it at the moment with COVID-19, but it's nothing new to me. We've been providing online services to families in Iraq and Saudi Arabia and countries like that don't have support available to them. So yeah, I'm like really excited to be here to just help as many people as possible and share some tips, and hopefully this will be a fun sort of workshop where you find it helpful as well as interesting. So thank you, Sarah, for organising this.
No, not at all. It's brilliant. So the reason I actually organised this is because challenging behaviour is quite a common co-occurring condition that comes alongside Tourette's. So yeah, I think actually this is going to be really informative to many of the families. My first kind of question to you is, in your opinion, what is challenging behaviour?
Okay, so in my opinion, challenging behaviour is anything that interferes with a child's learning, as well as their family life or like social opportunities. So if you've got a child who's engaging in behaviour that impedes their learning opportunities in the classroom or in one-to-one learning environments, I would say that needs to be targeted to reduce. And also, if you have a child who's engaging in problem behaviour and you can't get out for a family walk or go to the cinema or sit in a restaurant or just do the normal things that families want to do, then in my opinion that warrants a behaviour support plan to reduce. So those are my sort of two main things about challenging behaviour. If it interferes with learning and if it interferes with family life, then we've got to work on them.
Yeah, brilliant. And what are common causes of challenging behaviour?
So this is probably like the biggest question, right? Like, what is going on here? Like, why is my kid doing this? Well, from a behaviour analytic perspective, we're very much interested in the behaviours that we can observe. And there's basically 4 functions or reasons that a child or an individual engages in behaviour. So the first one is for attention. So your child might be engaging in challenging behaviour to get a reaction or your attention. So a classic example is my 2-year-old. He literally turned to at the weekend and overnight has started hitting. And is just looking, like literally looking and waiting for me to sort of like reprimand him or sort of notice him. So that is absolute classic attention seeking behaviour. The second function of behaviour is escape or avoidance. So that could be to escape or avoid a demand that you might have placed on your child, like come in from the garden, it's dinner time, you need to sit down and eat your meal. Or it could be even like avoiding a person or a setting if they're misbehaving and they don't want to be at school and they know that they might end up in suspension or something like that. So escape or avoidance, attention. The third one is access to tangibles. So we engage in a behavior because we're trying to get something. So I say I want a biscuit because I want a biscuit. Or I start hitting my little brother because he's got the toy that I want to play with. So it's to get something that you want. And the fourth function of behavior is called automatic reinforcement. So that's the big category that sensory falls into, where for whatever reason, it smells, tastes, sounds nice, something that contacts one of our senses, and that behavior happens whether or not another person's there. And they can be the trickiest ones to work on, those sorts of automatic maintained behaviors. The other three are a bit more straightforward, and the other three require another person to be involved a lot of the time. So that's what we sort of focus on when I have a client or a parent say to me, I've got this kid, I've got this challenging behavior, where do we start? Well, the first job is to figure out or try and identify the reasons that this behavior is happening. What is this person getting out of this behavior? Because behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens because it serves a purpose for a person. So we take, I don't know if you guys have heard of ABC data. You can just get a bit of paper and literally write ABC. And what we want to identify is the antecedents, more kind of commonly known as the triggers, the environmental change that happens before the behavior occurs. So, you might have a sibling snatch a toy off of your child. That could be the antecedent that then evokes the B, the behavior or the response that the child engages in, hitting, kicking, screaming, shouting, crying, whatever the behavior looks like. So we try to steer away from saying things like had a meltdown or got frustrated or felt anxious. Try to steer away from things like that and pinpoint specifically what the behavior looks like. That would be what you'd write down in that B column. And then the C part is a consequence. So the environmental change that happens after the behavior occurs. So typically it's kind of your reaction as a teacher or a parent or a caregiver. What did you do after the behavior happened? And we try and take ABC data for a few days to record some incidences every time problem behavior occurs. And then we have a look at it to try and figure out, okay, is there any patterns here? Like, he seems to be always doing this at tea time, for example, or just before lunchtime. Perhaps there's something going on that he's hungry or tired, or it could be that there's a certain person that he's always doing it, always engaging in the behavior around. And you do want to try and identify function. So is he getting something out of this? Is he always, he starts kicking and screaming and shouting. I give him the iPad, the behavior stops. He's getting the iPad, right? That would serve as access to tangible as a function of that behavior. So you can have multifunctional behaviors, and in fact, more often they are multifunctional, a little bit for escape, a little bit for access to tangible, for example. So that's the first job, is to identify out of this behavior. What purpose do is to track some ABC data. Everybody with me so far?
Yeah, we lost you just at the end there. You went a bit crackly, but hopefully everyone got the gist of what you were saying. I was obviously able to follow it because of my ABA background, so I knew what you were saying. But if anyone's got missed any part of that, then please drop a note in the chat box, and we can get Gemma to reiterate that. Okay, so obviously, like you say, we've got these 4 areas of behaviours. And hang on, I've just had a question come through. What age would you usually expect this behaviour to stop? So that's, I think, probably just a general kind of question for challenging behaviour, and not. Caroline, are you able to specify like what kind of challenging behaviour you're discussing here? See if she puts anything else through. Tantrums, so she put tantrums.
Yeah, so I think everybody can agree that it's very age appropriate for a 2-year-old to have a tantrum, right? But I've met 14, 15-year-old guys who will engage in what people would probably class as a tantrum or a meltdown. So this can happen throughout teens and into adulthood. And that's why, that's when the focus of my work is definitely with younger children, because they're only going to get bigger and they're only going to get stronger. So I don't really sort of worry too much about, is this appropriate or not? I'm more like focused on, is this interfering with learning? Is this interfering with family life? Then let's work on it, right? Like, you should enjoy your toddler. You don't need to just think, oh, he's 2, like that's what 2-year-olds do. Like, let's just put up with this and hopefully get through the next year till he gets to school. Like, you can have a happier life with your toddler. It just requires some knowledge about sort of teaching strategies and how to sort of help reduce those problem behaviors. But definitely, like, I want if you take anything away from this workshop, the take-home point should be that problem behaviors happen for a reason, and it's all about identifying the function as best as you can. Because I was chatting to a parent yesterday whose little boy engages in headbanging quite a bit, and that's a pretty severe self-injurious behavior. And she'd had some help from her school, and they were like, you know what, we think this is attention maintained. We just need to ignore this problem behavior. And we've taken some ABC data over the last week, and I've had a look at it, and it is sometimes attention maintained. He's sort of looking at you, waiting for you to react. But there's other times he's doing it when he can't accept no, or when he's told, your little brother's having a shot on your bike right now. It's nothing to do with attention as a reinforcer for the behavior. He's just really upset that he has to share, or he has to, be told that he can't have what he wants right now. And it's not really a behavior that would be very ethical to ignore in those situations. There's obviously a safety issue there as well. So really important, regardless of the topography or what the behavior actually looks like, it's more important to zoom in and figure out that function, because it will require a different intervention depending on what the function is. And when we've figured out the function, we would want to put in a behaviour support plan that has more like a 3-pronged approach. So we want to create lots of antecedent strategies, or in other words, prevention strategies. We want to prevent that problem behaviour from even having to occur in the first place. We also want to have, we want to teach a replacement behaviour that serves the same function. So instead of engaging in this problem behaviour, let me teach you this way of doing it instead. You're going to get the same outcome. It's still going to serve the same function, but this is way more appropriate and safer. So you need a teaching element in there. And then the third part of the support plan would be a kind of a consequence or a reaction strategy. So when the behavior occurs, what do you do, and what's the best plan of action here, and being consistent across the family with whatever that is. So I think one of the things people often make the mistake of doing is just sort of waiting for behaviors to sort of naturally occur in everyday life and then sort of reacting. Whereas if you've got a kid with challenging behavior, you want to really be good at preempting and practicing teaching those skills as often as possible. It's not usually enough to wait for the sort of naturally occurring opportunities to pop up. We, as behaviour analysts, we want to sort of contrive and engineer situations to practice those skills so that the child's getting lots of teaching opportunities, just so to make it easier for them and set them up for success, so that when they are in a more natural sort of context where typically a problem behaviour would be evoked, it'll be easier to prompt them, or preferably they would engage in the replacement behaviour independently. So it's all about figuring out what the skill deficit is as well as the function. So that's the next thing I wanted to talk about was, if you once you recognize the problem behavior and the function, you need to think yourself, well, what would I like my child to be doing right now? Like, what is the behavior I would way prefer them to be doing? So this mum the other day I was speaking to, the little guy was headbanging because his brother wanted a shot on his bike and he didn't like sharing. I think they were taking the stabilizers off the bike or something like that. Anyway, he was very unhappy about this. And I said to the mum, well, what would you preferred him to do in that incident? And she said, well, if, you know, and communication, he's signs, he's got some sign language and some emerging vocals, but he's by far not a fluent communicator. And she said, well, communication was really easy for him. What I'd love in an ideal world would be for him to say, hey, Mum, I'm not happy about him taking my bike right now. Like, no, thank you. But that's really hard for him. Like, he's barely got these emerging vocals and he's got quite a few signs, but it's easier for him to bang his head off the floor to get what he wants in that moment. So what we need to do is think of a replacement behavior that serves the same function that we can then teach to try and replace that problem behavior. And we do that by breaking skills down into their bite-sized chunks, little tiny pieces, and then building them back up. Because a lot of the children I work with, for example, with autism, often have skill deficits in communication and play skills and just social interaction. So, you know, we have to teach that quite systematically. And do that by breaking down the skill into little pieces. And that requires some skills sometimes. That requires some training in how to do that. And then you need to build up a reinforcement system. So if reinforcer is a new word to you, it basically is just, it's a type of consequence. So it's something that happens after a behavior. And it's something that increases the behavior over time. So if your kid keeps on saying, can I have a biscuit? And they get a biscuit every time, the likelihood is that they're going to keep saying, can I have a biscuit? Can I have a biscuit? Because that's working for them, right? Like reinforcement, that biscuit is contacting their request. So it's going to increase over time. The same goes for challenging behavior though. If every time your kid squeals and you sort of offer them the iPad, then that squealing is going to increase over time because they're getting what they want. So a lot of parents I speak to, I sort of try to steer away the focus from need to reduce the problem behavior, like let's get rid of the problem behavior. Well, let's flip it round. What is the replacement behavior that you would like to see? And let's focus on building that up and reinforcing that instead. And then that works for replacing it. Is everybody with me? Am I making sense? I feel like I'm talking fast.
No, you are. The line's a bit croaky, but I'm just hoping that everyone can hear it okay.
Some thumbs up. That's good. Thank you for the thumbs up.
So the next thing I want to move on to is rage. So it's a really common issue with many of our children with Tourette syndrome is rage. So they have low frustration levels, obviously either holding tics in or ticking all day, depending on what they're doing. So their threshold then for anything else other than that is really quite low. So coming home from school, for example, which is common obviously in autism, Tourette's, I think for many kids anyway, but for kids with Tourette's, they come home and they have meltdowns, the rage occurs. So it'd be really good to discuss maybe some strategies with regards to helping reduce that.
Okay, so let's think about this. What could potentially be the function of this rage? Why are they engaging in these behaviors? Like, are they trying to escape or avoid your demands or a setting? Are they looking for attention? Give me some ideas about what could potentially serve as a function for this.
So I think the most common comments I get from parents is children come home and they usually just fall apart. So whether their parent, like I've advised parents to, when they collect their child from school, don't talk to them, say hello, but don't ask them how their day was. Don't ask them what they have for lunch. Don't ask them, what lessons they had. Just let them sit in the car, drive home, give them half an hour downtime, then kind of start reintroducing some kind of interaction or demand on them. And that does work. Obviously, I'm just talking very general because every child is different. But I would definitely say that it's demand avoidance to start with, because they're just, overloaded with either ticking all day or from holding their tics in. But I don't know if anyone's got any questions they want to throw forward about this with your own circumstances. But yeah, I mean, my advice to families on this is to just leave them alone when they first come out of school.
So that makes sense if it's a child who's about to burst. The whole, I think it's very kind of the common analogy is Coke bottle, isn't it? If they've sort of tried their hardest to keep it in all day at school and they just want to let it loose when they come home, then let's thinking about that sort of three-pronged approach, but like preventing the problem behaviour from having to occur, then yeah, zip it. People are almost not aware of how many demands they place on a child. It's so automatic. How are you? How was your day? What did you do at school today? Demand, demand, demand. So if you know that that's going to invoke problem behavior, then it's literally just a, hi, here's a snack. You know what? Like, here's your favorite radio station. Let's put some music on. Here's a drink. Like, this is your time now. If you can preempt that explosion time, like, how can you sort of prevent that from happening by creating a better environment for your child that they feel confident and comfortable and safe? So whatever that is, pairing, that idea of pairing means putting something preferred with something not preferred. So if you can reduce your demands and create a nicer environment for them to be in, just for them to calm down, then I think that sounds like a good idea. And that idea that you mentioned, Sarah, about gradually and slowly slipping in demands just to get them back up again, because they're going to need to respond to a bedtime routine, right? Like, you're going to need to get through dinner and bath, teeth brush in bed. We call that stimulus demand fading in ABA land. And it's basically just, you're going to slip these little demands in very gradually and systematically. It's not going to be, right, get home, hang your bag up, get your shoes off, sit down, do your homework. That's not going to go down well, I don't think. So in that case, you just have to be really systematic in terms of how you can create a more pleasant and relaxing environment, whilst being very mindful about the number and types of demands as well you place on your child.
Lovely. We've had some comments come through.
Okay.
So my daughter is 12, has autism. My grandson is 7. For about the last 4 or 5 years, she has found being around him very difficult, to the point of crying, screaming, jumping up and down, and seems so distressed because she can hear him breathing, or he can hear her talking. I feel so sad to see his wee face drop as soon as he sees her company. Now, before we answer that actually, we have a very similar question that came through earlier today, but I'm going to read that out now as well. So it says, my son, like many, struggles with rage and goes from 0 to 100 in seconds flat. A lot of his rage is seemingly caused by sensory issues with the sound and actions by his sister, and only his sister. He's had this issue since she was born, and a lot of his anger and controlling, challenging behaviour is directed at her. If she whistles, makes the slightest sound whilst eating, he hits the roof. But he doesn't do this with any other peer, friend or family member. How would you suggest dealing with this?
Okay.
So, but 2 really similar questions. So, leave that with you.
Yeah, no, of course. So this happens quite a bit. Like, I've seen this happen with my clients as well. Like, let me talk a bit more about this principle or idea of pairing, because this is really, really effective for situations like this. So basically, and from what you've just described there, Sarah, you've got an aversive child. Poor child, but that's what they are. They're aversive to the other child. They're just bad news, for whatever reason. They're too noisy, or whatever it is. So how do we flip that round? Well, when I meet a new client, like, I'm a total blank canvas. There's no learning history with me. I'm just a blank slate. But I want to condition myself to become a reinforcer, to become something that they like and they want to approach me, and then I can teach them and they can learn from me. So how I do that is I come with a big box of toys, bubbles, slinkies, puzzles, pop-up toys, whatever, just a big bunch of fun stuff that kids typically like. And the idea behind the pairing principle is that I have the good stuff and I'm the neutral stimulus, but I'm going to make this good stuff even more fun because of my participation. And then the theory behind it is that the reinforcing properties of the good stuff rub off on the neutral stimulus. So ultimately the kid sees me and is like, oh cool, she's that lady with the bubbles and the slinky, and she's really good at making that spinning top go round. Like, I like this lady and I want her to come and see me more often. You kind of need to do exactly the same thing with the aversive child. We're going to call this per kid the aversive child. I'm going to sit at the top of my stairs now. See if this works any better.
Wi-Fi.
Okay, so where was I? I was basically saying you want to use this principle of pairing. So you're going to pair together anything you know your child loves. So let's say, for example, if I said to you, like, tell me your child's favorite thing, like make a list. We want to create a bank of potential reinforcers. What would they be? So screen time, popcorn, chocolate, tickles, you know, whatever those fun things are for your child. We want to get the aversive child to be delivering those things to the child who's engaging in problem behavior. Okay, so every time your child sees the aversive child, we want them to see them as being the giver of good things. We want to associate them with all their fun things. Okay, so you can use that principle of pairing, and that can be really effective. The other thing that you could try for some kids who have extreme challenging behavior towards these types of sensitivities is basically a desensitization procedure. So, you know, and it's very similar to the pairing principle, whereby you might just have the aversive child come out, say nothing at all. You'd have to have a fairly compliant child who's prepared to kind of go through this training, but you want them to come out and sort of just hand over the chocolate button or hand over the iPad and walk away, immediately back off. You know, it's literally say nothing, just hand over the reinforcer and walk away. And ultimately, you know, over time, you're going to build up. So you're going to, you know, hand over the screen and then stay there for a couple of seconds, then walk away, hand over the screen again, and increase the duration of time that the aversive child stays for the child who has problem behavior. Until ultimately, you know, that child can then say something whilst they're handing the screen over. So you have to be really systematic about this. So this is why I said earlier about breaking down these skills into tiny, tiny steps. But the key to all of this is having a reinforcer, having a thing, an item or activity that you know your child values, and using that. That's your tool. There's my dog just walking past. Are you with me? Does that make sense, everybody?
Yeah, brilliant. So we've got a question here. Is crying also part of rage?
Well, I don't know how you operate, like how you define rage. Like we in ABA land, we like to kind of have a definition for things. So, you know, tell me what rage is for your child. It could be completely different definition to my one. So we want to first of all decide, well, what is rage? What is frustration? What is anxiety? What is that for your child? Is it crying, kicking, screaming, hitting? So that's what when I said at the beginning that we want to be really specific and pinpoint these behaviors that we can see so that we're all on the same page. And then we can work on, you know, what's the trigger for them and what's the maintaining consequences for them. But I would steer away from using the generic sort of like, oh, non-compliance and frustration. Like, what does the behavior look like? Tell me what you see, and focus on those, because those are the behaviors that we can measure. We can see if they're increasing, or we can see if they're decreasing, and we have lots of different tools to do that in terms of how we measure behaviors like that.
Okay, lovely. Something else I would like to question is big trigger for a lot of meltdowns. So with a lot of kids with Tourette's, they often also have ADHD. So whether it's both or just one, impulsivity is a big issue. So kids are impulsive, you know, they might hurt their sibling, do something they shouldn't, and then may get told off for it because, you know, obviously if they've hurt a sibling or something, there's obviously still needs to be some kind of comment made about the situation. Now that can trigger, you know, an outburst. And I've had parents come to me before where they've said, my child's, you know, really impulsive and they always hurt their sibling, but I tend not to discipline them because I know that it's going to trigger an almighty meltdown. So just kind of, do you have any strategies for helping with impulsivity? Or if not, what would you advise to parents who are maybe a little bit apprehensive of actually challenging their child and telling them, you know, I know you can't help it, but you still hurt your sister?
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. So I get this question asked a lot in terms of, you know, those parents who feel like they're walking on eggshells a lot of the time in their own homes, which must be incredibly stressful. So I think for kids, I think you said it a bit earlier, Sarah, kids that go from like 0 to 100, like, you know, 1 minute they're calm, something happens, and then they're like absolutely, you know, going nuts. There's a really good strategy or resource that I use, and I actually bought it off of another behaviour analyst based in the States, Ashley Rose. I'd highly recommend you follow her Facebook page. Her company is called Mission Cognition, and she has a lovely little e-store with really affordable but really fab resources. And one of them I bought recently was called the Recharge Rug. I had a little boy in my social skills club who, quite a big boy actually, quite strong, and he would just fly off the handle quite impulsively. That would be a word you describe him. And the basic premise is it's, you know, you have a little cushion, blanket, you know, a kind of nice comfy time out area. But I think people, when you say time out, they think of that as a sort of punisher. This was really meant to be just an area where they could like have a little chill out zone. And it was really cute because she's got these visuals that you can print off that just look like little plug sockets, like little electrical outlets. And then, you know, all kids with, you know, screens typically identify like a battery that's about to run out as red or green. So you would have the red battery stuck somewhere near the child. And the idea is that they identify, I'm about to have a bit of a meltdown here. I need a recharge, and they would take the red picture of the battery that needs recharged over to the recharge rug area where there was all these options, all these little outlets where they could potentially plug in their battery. And the options were things like ripping up paper, taking a drink, having a chat, taking some deep breaths, doing some colouring in. Now, this is going to be completely dependent on your child and what sorts of activities you can sort of test out and sort of figure out can help, you know, calm them down. Basically, that's what we're looking for. It's fine to feel angry. It's fine to feel sad and upset. Like, we don't want to dismiss those feelings. We all have them. But it's not okay then to lash out at your sister. It's not okay to swipe all materials off the table. What we need to teach the child is to be able to calm themselves down. So this resource, which is a lovely way of visually supporting this skill, and it comes with a really nice script that you can use to teach the child how to use this system, all based on BST, behavioural skills training. And if that's new to a lot of you, it's really simple. It basically just means you're going to explain to the child what the lesson is, and you're going to model it. Then you're going to get them to rehearse what you've just modelled, and then you're going to provide them with feedback. So it's a really effective way to teach a child. And I've had success with this little resource called the Recharge Rug. In terms of, it takes a while to figure out what actually calms down the child, because one little boy, he just wants to rip up paper, had to just get a stack of newspapers. Another little girl, she wants to talk it out. And another little boy just wants to build Lego, and that's cool. Like, we want to make sure that when they do finally engage in those responses, that again, a contact reinforcement, whatever the reinforcement is for that child, because we want to encourage them to be more independent at calming themselves down. Because remember, like, a lot of adults struggle with this. You've always seen guys at the bar about to punch each other in the face. Like, you know, adults struggle with self-regulation. You know, it actually is a skill that we have to teach our kids. We can't just expect them to know how to calm down, right? So I think that would be a sort of a go-to resource that I'd recommend for that.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question came in about change. Now, this is really common as well with kids with Tourette's. So rigidity, they like routine, they don't like change. Now, someone actually wrote in because they're moving house and also the child is moving school, and parents are predicting some, an increase in challenging behaviour. How do you kind of best feel that a child can be supported with regards to change?
So I think big, like, life changes like that are tough. You can't practice moving house because it only happens once or twice in your lifetime, right? You can't practice having a baby because, again, you only have a baby once or twice in your life. So I think big changes like that are tough. But my first question to this parent would be, how is your child with little changes? Are they okay with that? Are they rigid? Are they flexible? If your kid's engaging in problem behavior related to, changing the color of their cup, or, the position of their chair or something like that, then I would definitely start there, because that's something that you can control and that you can provide multiple opportunities to practice with. So the way I mean, loads of my clients have problems with change, and some kids very, very rigid with, the slinky lives in this box, don't even think about putting it in the blue box, that goes in the red box, things like that. So we basically, it's kind of like forcing them to accept the change. But again, we break this down very systematically. So I might say to this kid, like, the slinky thing was a real kid, so he just couldn't cope with the slinky being put away in a different shelf. So I might put up, like, I'm just going to put it up here, and I would see those precursor behaviors, those sorts of red flags, like he was about to go nuts. And I'd be like, oh, do you know what? Like, let's just put it back again. Like, we can put it in this box. But then 10 seconds later, I might go, oh, I think I'm going to just put the slinky up here, and basically consecutive trials, like lots of practice, but reinforcing his calm behavior every time he allowed me to put it up on the shelf. And this took a while for this kid to accept these little changes, but we did it with multiple different things. He didn't like me drawing on the whiteboard. It had to be his whiteboard, like things like that. But lots of practice opportunities with little things that you control. With the bigger things, like the life-changing things, like moving house or having a baby, a lot of people resort to social stories. They're not evidence-based, so we can't really recommend them as behaviour analysts, but you can definitely use them with other behaviour analytic tools. So, get the photographs of the new house, or get the photographs of the new school, the classroom, the teacher, and, make up a little photo album and just talk about it. Like, it's basically just desensitization again. So exposing them to, what their new teacher looks like, what their new house looks like. It's just going to be trickier because you can't physically practice it. You can't, unless you do have access to your new house, in which case that would be awesome. But yeah, I would go with lots of visual supports, sometimes in the sort of social story order, but using, again, that behavioural skills training works really effectively, in addition to basically a social story as a visual support. Oh, you're on mute.
I was like, it's not working. Thank you so much. Okay, that comes to the end of any of the questions that were sent in. If anyone's got any questions that they'd now either like to put in the chat. Gemma, have you got anything more you'd like to share before we open up the mics for everybody?
I could talk probably for a whole week on this, so 40 minutes isn't a lot of time. I do have a private Facebook group, which I'd encourage you all to join. You're welcome to join. It's primarily for autism parents, but it's open to anyone who's interested in sort of parenting using evidence-based strategies. And I talk a lot more about this type of content. All the posts are in little learning units, so it's nice and easy to dip in and out of. But I think, like I said, the take-home point I would love for all of you to sort of take home today would be, get your head around the functions, identify those functions, and really sort of become a little behaviour detective and zoom in into your child's preferences, because That's your power. That's your tool. Your power tool is using reinforcement to build up those skills you want to see happen more often, and really focusing on those replacement skills rather than sort of perseverating on behaviours that you want to reduce, which I know is tough when you've got a child who consistently engages in problem behaviour, because it feels like that's just your life and you're consistently firefighting, immersed in challenging behaviour. If you can try just to think, oh, in an ideal world, what would I like to see my child doing instead that serves the same function, and just focus on that. That would be my...
Brilliant. I will share your email address with everyone as well. I'll send that through at the end. One of our participants has been really lovely and actually got the link for the Mission Cognition recharge rug resource. So that's in the group chat.
I'd recommend that. It's not expensive, and I really find it effective, so I'd highly recommend it.
That's fantastic. Thank you again for that, Jo. Right, this is an opportunity then where we can you can turn your mics off and chat with either of us. Obviously, Gemma's more the challenging behaviour and the autism questions. I'm more than happy to answer any tick Tourette's related questions. So yeah, feel free to undo your mics. I can hear someone saying something.
Can I just ask, in terms of if you have a child who doesn't listen, at what point is that, or could that be like a neurodiverse issue, that they're not functioning when they're listening, or they sort of have to say, what did you say, or you have to repeat, and at what point is it potentially that they're not actually listening? If that makes sense.
Gemma, did you hear that?
So as in they can hear you, right? They're not deaf, but they don't...
we've tried that. We actually had the ears tested and they were perfect. So we started with that, but we sometimes have a almost glazed, not really listening scenario. And part of me wonders whether there's a sort of neurodiversity attached to it, and it's sort of how to deal with it really, in terms of, because it's quite challenging at points, and you're often having to repeat yourself. And it's really sort of any advice that you've got on that, really.
Can he or she respond to their name when you call them?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What about everyday demands, like get your shoes on, put your jacket on, open the door, sit down, stand up?
If you give too many, then if you, for example, can you go brush your teeth and put your shoes on, you'll come back sometimes with a coat and shoes on. You won't get everything you've asked for if there's too many things in a list. Okay,
so the first thing we always try to identify is this a skill deficit? Like, does he genuinely not understand what you're asking? Or is this a performance deficit? He knows fine well what you're saying, he just can't be bothered responding. And that can be quite difficult to differentiate. But if you know he genuinely struggles with understanding or retaining the instruction, if it's a multiple step instruction, like we would break it down into one step instructions. So that's the easy stuff, like give me 5, touch your nose, clap your hands, brush your teeth, for example. So maybe he's able to do that, but maybe he struggles with the 2-step instruction or the 3-step instruction. So we'd want to figure that out, like where is he at with that, and work on teaching him how to retain the multiple steps. And a really cool trick to do that is, if you think about it yourself, when you go to the Tesco or the supermarket and you're like, right, what do I need? Bread, milk, butter, bread, milk, butter. You might say it to yourself, either in your head or out loud, until you actually walk into the shop and then you see it and you're like, oh yeah, bread, milk, butter. So we can train our kids to do the same. So you can say to him, right, little Johnny, I need you to go and brush your teeth, get your shoes on. What are you going to do? Get them to repeat it. Brush teeth, get shoes on, brush teeth, shoes, teeth, shoes, several times. And you'll see, once you get the kids trained in this, it's so cute. They'll walk away and start, and you'll hear them say, teeth, shoes, teeth, shoes. That's a really effective way of teaching a kid to respond to multiple steps, getting them to say it over and over. whilst they're walking. But you've also maybe got to be aware of the level of distractions and the distance they've got to travel, because that can be also quite tricky for kids in terms of retaining and responding to multiple step instructions. So try and minimize distractions and get them repeating.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, we've got one typed through. Hi Gemma, do you have any advice for a child with Asperger's who struggles with emotional anxiety, oversensitivity, aggression, and social issues? Any resource? I can't speak. Sorry. Any resources you can point me towards? I like the idea of the rug. He's 9 and has choked children when extremely overwhelmed. I understand antecedent strategies are important.
Yeah, antecedent strategies are important, but it's the consequences that is actually going to change the behaviour. So it's really the consequences or the reaction strategies that are going to make the big difference here. For anything, it's always about the consequences that change behaviour. For kids with Asperger's and sort of, you know, those kind of highly functioning children, I don't have a lot of experience with those guys because my bulk of my experience is kind of with the younger kids with sort of the bigger skill deficits. But you should definitely look into ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. This is sort of bridging the gap between behavioural psychology and cognitive psychology, and there's been phenomenal results with ACT. If you go into, again, my Facebook group, I had a really cool chat with Dr. Evelyn Gould. It's a recorded video chat, and it's an introduction to what ACT is. And I know that I don't know enough about it to give you anything more than that, but I know that's what you would want to research to learn more in terms of how to help those types of kids. Just become really sort of familiar with labeling emotions, recognizing the sensations in their body. So when their face feels red and hot, their heart starts beating, you know, you might feel excited, but you might also feel really nervous. So differentiating those feelings, and sort of, again, it's not about teaching the kids it's not okay. Of course it's okay to have feelings, but what can we do to then handle it? So practice, test out some stuff. How does your kid respond to, let's take some deep breaths. Just go and hide in our covers with our cuddly toys. That's what my kid does. He doesn't want to talk. He just wants to go to bed with his little rabbit, and he does not want to speak to me. My daughter is the polar opposite. She just wants to talk out and tell you how upset she is and how mad she is. So you have to sort of, it's a bit of trial and error, but definitely look up ACT. There's a few Facebook groups. Mark Dixon is a guy to look up, Stephen Hayes, and Dr. Evelyn Gould. But have a look in my group, and there's resources for listed in there too.
Lovely. She said that's extremely helpful, and thank you. Any other questions? Just going down to see if any mics are getting switched on. No. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, we can definitely finish off here. I really hope everyone's found it useful. I will later on today send back a feedback form. If you could just take 2 seconds, they're really simple, just a couple of notes, that'd be great, just to help us improve for the future. If you have any questions afterwards that you can think of, obviously feel free to put them through, and I will also email everyone later with regards to Gemma's private Facebook group and also her email address with regards to asking questions or signing up for a course that she runs. Okay, thank you everyone.
Thank you.
And lots of messages coming through, Gemma.
Oh great.
Yeah, we'll lots of messages saying thank you. They're saying you're awesome.
Lovely. Thanks for being such an awesome audience. I hope to see you in my Facebook group.
Okay, everyone, take care. See you later.